And good morning, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Johannes is going to tell us about personal growth and how the development of personal growth will enable your life to change. Johannes, can you start us off, please?
Sure. It's good to be with you. I have some thoughts. Whether or not they're going to make sense, I guess we'll find out. It seems to me that it's fairly safe to assume that if we're drawn to some kind of path of personal growth or transformation, it's probably because in some way we're suffering or at least dissatisfied. And that could be that we're in chronic physical pain, right? That is no fun. Or we go from one bad relationship to the next, or just stay in one bad relationship. It's bad enough. Or that we're riddled with anxiety or depression, or that our self-esteem is just hemorrhaging. So the bottom line is that these are painful things, right? And so some of us are drawn to a path of trying to do something about it. The crux of it is, from my point of view, that in order to solve a problem, and that means really any problem, we have to first understand the nature of that problem. And when it comes to a problem like suffering or mental anguish, that understanding, it needs to be more than just intellectual. It needs to be experiential. So it seems to me like the question is, can we face ourselves? And by face ourselves, I mean really look at ourselves unflinchingly as we really are and absorb and immerse ourselves into this question of our suffering. So in other words, taking a close look underneath the hood. Because if we can do that, we might get some of these understandings that can really begin to move and shift things around for us. So I believe that personal growth is about knowing ourselves, and we do that by being intimate with ourselves. And this means coming to terms with whatever is conflictual in our hearts and our minds. And by the way, I think that includes coming to terms with the idea that work, it will never be finished, right? We're always going to be works in progress. So that's kind of a big ask, right? That's easier said than done. But as we're heading down this kind of a path, it seems to me that one of the things that people at one point or another become aware of is how intricately connected our suffering and our dissatisfaction is with a need to avoid the immediacy of our direct experience, avoid the full range of our feelings. And by the way, this need to avoid is often largely unconscious. So, but if we can learn, by the way, the irony of that, right? If you think about it, that the very effort to turn down the volume on our pain and suffering really end up cranking that volume right back up. But I believe that if we can learn how to attend to this kind of a fundamental escapism, that we might be able to untangle ourselves from it long enough to gain access to deeper parts of our being. And it's really at those deeper layers that the real growth and healing tends to happen. So I don't want to put you guys to sleep, but I'll just summarize this by saying that personal growth is about knowing ourselves. It's about being intimate with ourselves. And we're intimate with ourselves by attending to the fulsome flow of our own experience. And at some level, I think this requires that we give up on self-denial, that we give up on trying to be pure or perfect, but actually instead become more fully human. So less pure, more whole, and I think that's where it's at. And I think Sigmund Freud probably said this a lot better than I did when he said, it's about making the unconscious conscious.
Yeah. That's great, Johannes.
That's true.
We're talking about these incredible ideas, and I'm also thinking that you mentioned about how? What does it look like? How do we do it? So I thought that maybe I could put some meat on the bones and actually paint a picture of what it could look like, because these ideas can easily become very abstract, right?
Exactly.
So I'll tell you a little story just to paint a picture. Many years ago, I was a kindergarten teacher. So I was working with 4 and 5-year-olds, and it was also a clinical internship. So one day I'm in the class, and there's these 4 and 5-year-olds running around, and we have to separate the class. Half the class has to go to the gymnasium, and the other half has to stay. So this little girl, we'll call her Maria, this 4-year-old little girl, she was upset, believe me. She was very upset about not being able to go to the gymnasium. And she had a meltdown, an epic meltdown, like you wouldn't believe. She was screaming, hollering. And so I sat down with her, and I said, you know, you look like you're very angry. She says, yes. I said, are you angry with me? And she said, yes. And then I said, wow, it must have really hurt you if you're that angry. She softens a little, and she says, well, yes. I said, okay. And if that anger that you feel, if it came out on me, what would that anger want to do to me in your imagination? Not in reality, but in your mind, if you just lost it. So Maria, the little girl, she begins to she makes these balls of fists like this, and you can see she's experiencing a tremendous rage. And she begins to describe these very primitive, vicious ways of attacking me, hurting me. And after each round of description, I would say, wow, thank you. Is there anything else? And then she would have another wave of this, really primitive stuff, really going after me. And this would go on for a few minutes, and she was sort of beginning to calm down, and I would say, is there anything else? This is maybe after 3 minutes, and she was calm now, and she says, no. I said, okay. So we sat in silence for maybe 15 seconds, and then she says, oh, there is one more thing, Mr. Johannes. And I said, yeah, what's that? She says, I love you. And then she goes on about her day, just beaming with joy, getting along with everybody. So I think it's important to bring an actual picture of what, this little girl, she went through.
It's a wonderful picture.
That was growth, right? And so these ideas can become really abstract, but that's a picture of what this could actually look like.
Yeah. Very nice.
Actually, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And, as you spoke, I thought, oh, that's that heart being exposed, and that I love you, like underneath the anger and the rage and the grief and the sadness, there's love. And, the bottom line is that we're made for love. We're conceived, hopefully, in love and born in love. But, of course, lots of things come in the way. And that's what Johannes was sort of just exploring, the other things that come in the way. And then after the grief and the anger and the rage for not getting her way, she turns around and says, I love you, Johannes. I mean,
yeah,
that's beautiful.
It's very touching. Yeah, I'm sort of choking up thinking about it. Yeah.
Very true. What about a walking meditation? How powerful could that be? A nice, gentle motion. What do you guys think of that from each of your point of view?
Well, I think part of what's coming up here, right, is that because everyone is so different and unique, it's really hard to give generic suggestions, because what might help you may not at all help me.
Right.
And that's part of the difficulty. But we could talk about sort of what drives suffering on a more global level, sort of the essential idea of what drives suffering. Teshin is talking about self-absorption and the self-referential way of being that is contributing to suffering. My mind goes to Dr. Davenlu, the founder of ISTDP, and he talked about character neurotics and symptom neurotics, and they're different animals. So symptom neurotics are the very rare individuals. You may only encounter a handful in a lifetime, where their attachment traumas happen later in life. Treatment with these individuals is usually pretty straightforward and brief. There usually isn't a lot of unconscious repressed rage. There might just be a matter of some grief and loss that needs to be processed. Anyway, with these individuals, whatever resistance that they do have, it's only motivated because change is scary in and of itself. That's their only motivation for resisting. Now compare that with the character neurotics, which is like most of us. Here, resistance is not only because it's scary to change, right, and face the unknown, but it's also in the service of self-defeat and self-sabotage and self-punishment. So that points to a very specific understanding of part of what drives our suffering.
That's really important, isn't it? This self-punitive part that we get entangled with, and
It's a take home.
I don't think we can have a conversation about self-growth without bringing this part in, which is
absolutely
our culture, American culture at least, and I would say Western modern culture is obsessed with growth.
It was from the context of getting rid of the ego or the punitive superego that's bashing us up, maybe. So, anyone comment?
Johannes?
Well, my mind goes to when Teshin is talking about how the very notion of growth can become co-opted and hijacked by the self-punitive system. My mind goes to what I was saying earlier about self-denial, and that as long as we're trying to be pure or perfect, there's parts of our being that we're deeming impure and imperfect, and then we're trying to get rid of those parts of ourselves. And that's a recipe for internal conflict and being divided internally, having internal acrimony. And so that's why I'm saying that we have to, instead of trying to renounce parts of who we are, we actually have to renounce renunciation itself and just be all that we are. And so that tends to lead to a certain peace of mind. I don't know about freedom from greed and hatred and ignorance. That's kind of above my pay grade. But I can tell you that it leads to a certain peace of mind.
So in Zen, we put a heavy emphasis on inquiry.
Inquiry is also the first step of Davimu's methodology, which is inquiry, trying to really understand what's going on here. What are the most intimate thoughts and feelings?
What happens is we can actually help them see that they have been the main player. Instead of giving the story to the minor actor, they're giving it back to themselves. And we do that by stringing together in our inquiry how this has played out in their lives.
I get it now. I get it. Yeah. Some people have a tendency to make other people the main focus of their lives. You're really talking about a form of self-neglect, where you see some people organize their lives, for example, either around giving other people what they want or what they think they want, or denying other people what you want. The common denominator here is that what's actually really best for you falls through the cracks, and you forget about yourself, in a healthy way, not the kind of healthy self-forgetfulness that you hear about in Zen. That's not what this would be about.
Right, and to add to that, we sort of tend to externalize, our difficulties, our problems. He's the cause of my problem. She's the cause of my difficulties. If only my wife acted the way I wanted her to.
Just breathe before you pick it up.
Yeah,
because what we do is we hold our breaths in reality. Yeah. Who's this calling?
Part of the issue, though, right, and we talked about that earlier, is how easily the healthy process of working on ourselves can be co-opted and hijacked by the self-punitive system. So part of the issue is if we forget to do that exercise of breathing, are we then going to beat up on ourselves, right? And
true. Yeah.
Break ourselves over the coals because we didn't stop and breathe. It's really a tricky situation. It's so easy for the healthy impulse to grow and heal to become co-opted. And that's another reason why it makes sense to find a good, really skilled psychotherapist.
What do you mean by co-opted? What is that? What do you mean by that, co-opted?
Hijacked. In other words, it's masquerading. You're you're raking yourself over the coals because you didn't take a breath before you responded to a text message. And you might say, well, I'm just, this is me holding myself accountable, right? But really, you're just beating up on yourself. It's not helpful.
Yes, and in Buddhism we have this concept called, actually I don't know if it's Buddhist or not, but I often work with these things, I call near enemies. So when we examine our experience, it actually can feel quite anxiety producing. So we do not want to produce that.
I mean, that seems to me like the dark underbelly of any change model, right? The flip side of any change model is how that model can be abused, right? And I think that holds true for any model, whether it's Buddhism or ISTDP. And it just makes sense to be aware of that and have that on our radar screens.
Yeah.
Balance. I'm going to have a little bit of tofu, and I'm going to have a little bit of chocolate. Okay, but how in our body... I love sugar, but I also eat tofu, so that's kind of how I balance it, tofu and chocolate together. But the point I'm making is it's an analogy. It's a deep analogy. But how would I feel? You could help me, ISTDP experts. If I want to feel balanced in my body, and I want our members and our patients and clients to really understand balance, because that's what you're talking about. If I recognize balance, I won't be doing that too much, because then I'm overdoing it, and I'll be doing it too less. How would I experience balance?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on that. First, I want to respectfully reject the label of an expert. I don't want to pressure myself.
Right.
I don't.
Four experts.
Yeah, we're together. We have something going for us.
You're right.
Right. Right. Well, it also is just not true. I don't think I am. But here's the thing. So
I'm sorry.
So here's the thing. From my point of view, this is my recipe for balance. Everything on the inside goes. No self-denial on the inside. Whether it's a mighty rage or a tremendous tenderness or a gut-wrenching guilt, healthy guilt. There's unhealthy guilt too. We haven't talked about that. Whatever's going on the inside, whatever impulses you have, whatever urges you have, green light. Let it rip. Okay? But that is not a license to act out, right? So letting go of self-denial does not mean that we indulge or act on every whim and impulse. That can actually be just as self-denying as more obvious forms of self-denial. So balance is everything on the inside goes, and then externally we use our judgment and follow our felt sense of what feels right. So letting go of self-denial and being fully human is not a license to act any way we want and be careless towards other people. In fact, if we're doing that, I think we're moving further away from our humanity, actually.
Yeah.
Was speaking about this opening, this universal experience of seeing ourselves as far, far more expansive than we normally do. And Rose, you're speaking about love. And so I just think it's important to mention that as important and valuable as those experiences are, they should in no way, shape, or form be used to dismiss or neglect the importance of the kind of self-love that would help us set boundaries when we're being treated poorly, for example. So we don't want to make the ideals of selflessness, again, to have them to be co-opted by the self-punitive process. There's nothing enlightened or spiritual about not having good boundaries and tolerating being treated poorly.
Fundamentally, there is no problem. It's where we are whole and complete, and helping somebody see that is the goal. To experience it, not see it. Experience it is the goal.
Experience being whole and complete. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. But I think that
doesn't that take us around the wheel into the...
It takes us around full circle, because we start off with how our defensive, what we do to cut off experience is driving our suffering. You guys deserve a lot of credit for doing this. This whole thing about a roundtable discussion, what a genius idea. There's not enough roundtable discussions, that's for sure.